I have a new project to share with you guys. It's going to be a quilted jacket. I got the inspiration earlier this fall in a video, specifically this and this. I'm going to make it with 3 different fabrics. For my outer shell, it's this one here in cumin. It's from Merchant and Mill, the dry oilskin. If you live in Canada, I highly recommend to buy your Merchant and Mill from Simplify Fabrics. I'll put the link in the description below. So I get my Merchant and Mill fabric from Simplify Fabric because they buy as wholesale, and they also, I think, have a better agreement with duties than we do as individuals. So it comes to actually cheaper. I haven't asked them, but I believe that you could send them an email if they don't have the fabric that you'd like, and you could in that email send a screenshot or a picture, and if there's enough of you messaging them with a certain type of fabric, it's very possible they'll get it for you. So just go check with them and contact. For my inner lining, I got this organic cotton flannel, also from Simplify Fabric. I wanted something just a little bit soft and also durable. And yeah, I think they're going to be very lovely together. This is wool batting. It's made with Canadian wool and mill in Canada. Got it from Custom Woolen Mill. I'm gonna put the link in the description below. They totally had a fair price. I do believe that they have different thickness. You can go look at their website. It's super nice. It has little bits of grass in it, but honestly, it's barely visible. And since it's gonna be in the inside of my jacket, I do not believe it'll be a problem. So this is it unfolded. It has a fairly good thickness, and for where I live, which is on Vancouver Island, I think this amount of wool batting is just going to be wonderful to wear. It's very light, by the way, and fairly soft. I love wool, so for me it's not a question. And why wool instead of cotton batting? Wool batting is light and it's much warmer than cotton, and here on Vancouver Island it does get pretty cold, comparable to northern countries in Europe. And I haven't seen versions with wool batting, so I'm really curious how that's gonna feel. So let's get started. To make the quilting part more manageable for my regular sewing machine, because I don't have a quilting sewing machine actually with the bigger platform, I decided to cut each panel of the pattern but bigger than the actual pattern themselves, because as some of you may know, when quilting multiple layers of fabric together, the fabric may shift onto one another even with the pins. And I wanted to make sure I would have enough of the quilted part for each panel pieces that I will cut to the proper size. Once I had got all of my panel pieces I needed for my version of the pattern, the next step was to draw the line for the quilted part. I was going to do this only on my yellow dry oilskin, and to help myself with that, I got myself a couple tools. First, this Tailor ruler that is see-through and already 4-inch in width, so that I could use both sides at the same time easily to make my tracing time a little faster. And next, a fresh piece of Tailor chalk in yellow, as close to the color of my fabric that I could get. I wanted some fresh, sharp edges to make the line as subtle as possible in case it was hard to remove the chalk afterward. As far as the design for the quilted part, I wanted my line to be parallel onto one another and at a 45-degree angle from the bottom of the jacket. So I used my Tailor cutting mat with the preset 45-degree angle, looking at it and verifying along the way as I was tracing multiple times to make sure it was okay. For my lines, I decided to not do a continuous line in case it was hard to remove the chalk, as I said, because I can't wash the dry oilskin. So I made my lines about 4 to 6 centimeter apart, a half centimeter in width to 1 centimeter, so that it would be as little as possible while still followable with the sewing machine. The last task I had to do that day was making my bias tape. Because I was going to bound all of the edges in the cumin, I actually bought 1 extra meter of the fabric than the recommended amount, and that was just enough, guys. Maybe I had like 15-30 centimeter left, but I would not buy less than a meter for the bias tape bounding, just in case. I also did some bias tape with my inner lining color, the green that you see here, but I didn't need as much. I wasn't too worried. The construction of the Sanda collar has a genius part. The top collar is slightly bigger than the under collar. Let me put this together so you get a visual. Yeah, here we go. Right in through here. And that's made so that the underlining will pull on the collar so that it stays down and in its intended shape. So for that part, I did decide to sew the wool batting only to the top collar because I wanted the quilt look to be congruent with the rest of my jacket. But if I quilted the underlining to the top part, I couldn't imagine how I could fit it in because the quilt line will not allow me to tug. So I will sew the quilt part only to the top collar, and the under collar will be like the instructions separated. To add on that, unlike what the pattern instruction says to do, I did decide to sew all 3 layers together. So my wool batting, my dry oilskin, and my cotton flannel for the inside lining. I decided to do that because it's possible with movement and over time that the wool batting could have come apart from the stitching. And if that would happen and it's not attached to the inner lining, my section of wool batting could have fallen at the bottom of the coat. So that seemed like a good idea. We're going to see at the end. So my next step of what I am at, it's the pinning of my 3 layers together. I am going to use the quilting pin, and as you see, they differ from a normal pin as they are already curved and they're pretty big, and I'm hoping that's going to give me enough room to pin all my layers. Even though the wool batting is big, it's pretty fluffy, so it should compress. And you guys are probably thinking, oh, but it's a dry oilskin. This coat will not be washable. It's going to be a send to the dry clean. So my pin marks, I'm hoping that just by working the fabric lightly with my fingers like this, I'll be able to work it so that the pin marks don't show too much. And another thing that I planned is, because it's oilskin, I cannot use a heat iron, so I have wooden point turner to help me flatten some edges if I need to. I also have this here, which is a wood presser, to help me out. Otherwise, I'll have to do all finger pressing, even with the binding. And not kidding, guys, I think I must have like 7 meters of the binding, maybe. Okay. I intentionally put the pins in the middle of my square so that it would not be in the way of the foot of the sewing machine, and I would not have to remove the pins in order to reduce the amount of shifting that would happen. As far as my thread, I used the Gutterman recycled polyester, and that is the only plastic of my project, so I'm pretty proud of that. This foot is a walking foot. I highly recommend using a walking foot for any quilting project, as it's going to feed both the top and the bottom layer at the same time and reduce, because of that, the amount of shifting of the upper fabric onto the lower fabric. The stitch length that I use is 4, so my widest, unlike what the instruction in Merchant and Mill says, because of the thickness of my fabric. When quilting, we always start from the middle of a piece, like right here for me, and work from the middle to a side. And then to do the other side, you go back to your middle and you work the other way. This reduces the amount of shifting that can happen. After sewing the quilting lines, it was time to remove the pins, which are a fair diameter, as you can see, and they do leave a significant hole in my dry oilskin, as you can see here. So I intended to make it disappear, rubbing the fabric together, rolling it between my fingertips, and then pressing the edges down backward onto the fabric. Let me give you a close-up. It worked pretty good, I would say, as you can see here. So my verdict, use the quilting pin. They worked very well. An important part of the quilting and pinning I wanted to share with you guys is that we need to set the bottom fabric onto a non-slippery surface. For me, my carpet worked very well, and as you can see here, I was just stretching my fabric with my hands. This allows the traction for the bottom fabric to not slip on the ground like if it was a wooden floor as you spread the other pieces of fabric. So for me, my wool batting needed to be stretched out a little bit with my hands, and then once I put the cumin oilskin on top, that's a lot of layers of fabric that could shift onto one another as I pinned. So the carpet is a good, it's a good surface if you have access to one, I would say. Another part is when you place your pin, it's important to not have them point in the same direction, and you want to start in the center of your fabric. So here I put a couple right in the center, and then I'm gonna work from the center to the periphery as I put all of my pin in place. And that's it, as simple as that. To make the fabric a little bit more manageable, I rolled it a little bit like a burrito technique into my regular sewing machine, and I was just pushing it with my hands as I was sewing, and that worked out just fine, guys. Here's some of the bias tape I've already completed. I'm using the pen to force it a little bit more into its bias tape shape so that it's easier to handle once I will be ready to sew with it. I wanted to show you how I made bias without a heat iron. So I still use this bias tape maker
foot, very useful. And I fed my dry oilskin through it. And with the help of this wood presser, I was rubbing the edges down in order to give it its classic bi-state shape. And I will say, guys, that it worked very well. Look at this. So the next part was folding it over onto itself and using this wood block again to press it down together. Onto the front patch pockets now. I wanted my quilted line on each pocket to match to the quilted line of each front panel. So I laid down my fabric and I followed the lines as best as possible. And once it was all sewn up together, that's what it looked like. It was an easy step and I really liked the result. Totally worth it. To transfer the pocket placement dots onto my fabric, I poked some holes onto the paper pattern where they were from the right side to the back side, and I used a fairly big needle to wiggle onto my fabric a couple holes matching the top of the pockets. This is what they look like, barely visible but enough to help me align the pocket. I thought I'd share that tricks in case you didn't know it. I will do a bias tape on the bottom edge of my pocket, and I trimmed some of my wool batting at the top to make my folding over a little bit more manageable.
So it turns out I don't really like the size of the pockets I finished yesterday. I had done the folding and the bias tape on both pockets, and I just laid them on my front panel of the jacket for the night. And this morning when I got up, I was like, I find them too big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out the bias and shorten them from the bottom of the pocket. And that should do the trick so that I don't have to start over completely. Chime in the comments below. Does it ever happen to you halfway through a project where you're like, oh, this is not quite right to my taste. I need to change it. That happens to me actually fairly frequently. And that's the beauty of sewing. I can tweak along the way and take a step back and slow down to make it just a little closer to my taste. All right. Yeah, I'm going to continue now.
Ta-da! This is my fixed pockets. I'm happy I took the time to shorten them. I like how my quilted lines lines up perfectly onto one another. And as you can see here, I did 2 top stitching line on my bias, allowing my pocket to be super strong.
I am finally at the step of assembling the pattern pieces together, and I am very excited. In the instruction, it says to finish with a zigzag stitch or a serged edge because the jacket is constructed with a lining, but I am not doing it with a lining as we know already. So I will bound the inside seam with the same fabric of my inside layer, which is the cotton flannel. I am going to do that for the center seam, the back piece, the way the bottom back ties to the back of the shoulder, which is a very interesting construction, by the way. I want to talk about that a bit more. And then I'll put bias also on the arm inseam. And then everywhere that's outside, I'll actually use the bias that I've made with the dry oilskin. Okay, so if you are not familiar with this pattern, the one thing that's very interesting is the way the shoulders are constructed. Normally for shirt jackets and all that, unless it's a raglan sleeve, there's usually a seam right on top, and even some raglan sleeve make a seam on top. But this one, very interestingly enough, this piece here that you see is actually the shoulder. So there are no seam on the top. I go right here, and that becomes the shoulder, and that becomes the upper back panel. Let's see if I can stand back and get you to see. Oh yeah, so that's how it goes. And it goes in through the back. And the middle seam is actually those two pieces right here sewn together. So that's going to be my next step. All right. Yesterday, as I was assembling some of the panels, I realized something that would be useful knowledge for you guys. By the way, if you didn't know, this is all uncharted territory. The Sanda bound hack that is published on the Merchant and Mills website doesn't have any directions on quilting fabric and this version of the project I'm doing. So you can think of this video that I'm sharing on making this project as a way for you to get a little bit of a better chance than me from the start. So the mistake that happened yesterday, as you know, so far as you've watched this video, I quilted my fabric before cutting the actual pattern pieces, and I quilted it a little bit bigger in case the fabric was shifting. And it did shift, so it was a good decision. Afterwards, I cut each pattern pieces onto the fabric that was quilted. And what happened after cutting the pieces is the puffiness from the wool actually pushed on the sewn quilted line so that it was fraying. So basically, as I was working yesterday, I realized that the sewn part was getting undone, and where I would have assembled the seam, it would have been unsewn further than where I was closing the seam. So I had to redo each end, and I finished it with a back stitch so that it would not fray again. But my advice, if you want to do a similar project, would be that as soon as you cut each panel, each piece of the pattern, you would edge stitch all around so that the wool or whatever you use as for batting doesn't push on that quilted line and undo the stitching. That would be my advice. There is another thing I wanted to show you. There's a center seam in the back panel of the Sanda jacket. So because my bound seam are fairly thick because of the 2 layers of dried oilskin, the wool batting, and my cotton flannel, I thought at first that I would top stitch this bound edge to hold it flat, but then I really didn't like the look on the center back panel. Let me show you. Yeah, so this here is my center back panel, and yeah, so I had a second line of top stitching right here, so it didn't look symmetrical, and that bothered me. So I unpicked it, and because I had top stitch and all the stitch were closer together, when I unpicked it, it definitely left a little bit of a line. I'm gonna show you that there on camera so that you are aware of that. Can you, yes, we can see it. All of this in here, it's subtle, but I can see it and it kind of bothers me. So if Be wary, know that if you top stitch really tight stitches and there's pressure, it might leave a mark in your dry oilskin. I don't know why here it left a mark, and where I had pins when I was quilting, like here, all those marks by rubbing the fabric, as I've shown, went away without a problem. But this here, for some reason, left a little bit of a mark. Yeah, so after the center seam back disappointment, I decided to not top stitch any of the part they say to top stitch in the sewing instruction. Yeah, so right through here in the instruction they say to top stitch the seam that's inside, and I decided not to. And as you can see here, it matches well with the quilted look of the other part, so it's not an issue. And in the end, I have tried on, and it doesn't feel super bulky in the back, even with the bound edge. Also, this is meant to be a coat, and I'll be wearing it with layers, so if there's a little bit of room, I think it is not a problem at all. So my next part for today, it's going to be the collar. Let me grab the piece. I decided to make it both sides in dry oilskin, so the yellow part, because if I flip it up, people will see it, and I didn't want it to be green. I just wanted the entire look, if I flip the collar up, to match with the yellow of the jacket for the rest. Merchant and Mills, in the instruction, they say to sew the right side together. So for me, that would look like this. But I want, and then you flip it back, right? So that would be like this, and then you flip it back, and then I would have an edge inside. But I didn't want that because I already do a bias tape everywhere, and I want the look to be congruent. So I will sew them wrong side together. And if this looks a little big, because obviously if I was sewing it wrong, right sides together and folding it, there will be a part that would be folded in and make it the collar a little smaller. But maybe I will like to have a big round collar, and maybe not. So I'm going to assemble it first, and then I will pin it to the jacket and see if I want it a little smaller or that size.
This is my collar assemble, and as you can see here, there is a concave shape to it. This design I think is especially good for a quilted jacket because it allows my collar to be folded down even though my fabric is so thick. So I wanted to point it out because that's especially good for a quilted jacket like I did. This is what it looks like once assembled onto the body of my jacket. It looks pretty good. As you can see here, my sleeves are extra long, and that's because I didn't do the classic sleeve construction the pattern wanted. But this decision was intended on my part so that I could decide once assembled the length of the sleeve I wanted.
Hey, I did it. I finished all my bias tape. I would say it took me almost 4 hours. That was just for the yellow dry oilskin bias tape, because between the bias tape for the cutout flannel for the inside, and then making all those several meters of bias tape for both fabric, I would say that would have been a solid 8 hours, like solid full day. Yeah. So as far as what I did for the pattern, the instruction by Merchant and Mills have you do a continuous bias tape, and they make you do a little cut to cut the corner to create space, and with a cut that would leave a hole. And I didn't like the idea of having potentially fabric fraying, and so I decided to just do a free bias at the bottom, and then on the button side to have it be my top bias and just tuck it under and close it with a back stitch and all that. And it looks very good. I'm pretty happy with it. So my next step is the buttons. And I do have a bit of buttons in my collection. Let's go take a look.
There are a few things that make sewing special for me, and it's about refining the details. I don't know if you've noticed, but in every ready-made garment, they go for the cheapest, plain-looking button as possible, generally made out of plastic. And for me, I like to refine every garment with quality craftsmanship buttons, usually made out of natural material. So for this project, I wanted a toggle, and when I'm usually ready to do the buttons for any garment, I lay a few options down on the piece and I let it sit for a few hours, sometime overnight, until I made my decision. For this project, I selected these vintage leather buttons. I love their color contrasting on the cumin hue of the jacket. I think it's gonna look very, very good. On another jacket I've made, it's about 3 years old and I've lost a couple buttons. So for this jacket, I decided to try a different strategy. Notably, sewing this little guy here on the inside attached to the leather toggle so that with the force of buttoning and unbuttoning over time, it would give more chance for the button to stay and not the thread to rip off or wear off. So we'll see how that's gonna go. I must admit, guys, that I'm not a diehard and I have no problem using the buttonhole foot of my sewing machine for any project that requires buttons. I want to share a little trick that makes sure the thread of my buttonholes never fray. And it's by using this product here. You apply a small quantity on the inside and then I wait 5 minutes and I use my heat iron without steam, holding it for just 10 seconds, and there's no marks of glue left, and it's worked wonderfully for me so far with all of my buttonholes project.
I did it. I finished it yesterday. Actually, this morning. I put my little French Canadian closet tag down in the middle, right here. It flips up because I refuse to top stitch to not compress my quilted look, but I was proud enough of my project to say it was me who did it. It took me 3 weekends, and I think that's my longest project to date. Maybe when I was a beginner, it would take me a few weekends to do a project, but I don't think it was because they were more complicated, but because I wasn't very good. But you know what? Saying that, now that I've done this jacket, I have a lot more knowledge and I feel that I could probably do it in 2 weekends instead of 3. Yes, that I think it would be that much faster because of what I've learned doing this. Yeah, so let me put it on. It is not perfect, but no one's gonna notice it. And the only people who would notice it are the sewing police and those people who are looking to find some mistakes in my project. You know what I mean. They can just, I can just walk away from them. So there's a few things I want to say. For the sleeve, I actually didn't use the Merchants and Mills instruction. They were saying to have it straight, to sew and then to insert it. I am not a big fan of this method because it makes a straight angle in through here. And my fabric is so thick. I mean, it's not the thickest thing out there, but it's pretty thick. It was not working very well, so I decided to sew the sleeve to the body and then to do the inside seam of the sleeve and the side in through here. And because I have a slender frame for my height, there was still so much room in the torso that I was able to make a little bit of a curve of about 1 inch and think a little bit more in the jacket. So overall, in the width of the body, I've taken probably 2 inches from this side and this side, 2 inches on either side. I had sized up one size because that's what they say to do in the instruction. But honestly, if you're on a slender body frame like me, you don't need to size up for the quilted part because it is already a very roomy pattern. But sizing up, what helped me is that it gave me room to play, to take in the edges and things like that. It really is up to you. And I did add a little bit of width at the sleeve, about 1 centimeter on either side, because I wanted to have room to put a thick sweater under. And I have tapered of about, 2 centimeters, so 1 on each side of the seam. So from the middle of my form to the wrist, I tapered just so I would have less airflow coming in through. This is just a fit preference, and I'm telling you what I did so that if you like my look, you can pick up from my experience and what I'm saying. Another thing that I would say made this project a little harder is that the wool batting that I used was structured, like the wool fibers felt strong and puffing out. And that, I mean that in comparison to cotton batting that people use in normal quilting blanket. And that cotton batting, I have worked with it before. It is very compacted and flat and not difficult to work with. It's like it would be working with 3 layers of fabric, which is kind of, but this, it really felt puffy from the wool batting. I have zero regret. Like this jacket, as I'm wearing it, it feels warm. But as I was working, the structure and the expensiveness of the wool batting made the project a little bit more challenging to work with. And I'm just telling you from my experience. I feel that working with a normal quilting batting made out of cotton would have made this project much easier and faster, but it wouldn't have this very warm feeling that I'm experiencing right now. It's quite nice. It's quite nice. I quite like the collar design on this jacket. I think there's a few things that are making this pattern stand out, and the main one is this round collar. I think this jacket would actually look wonderful in a big thick denim with the round collar. Another feature that defines this pattern that I like is that there is no shoulder seam. The front panel goes over the back and ties into the back, so that there's a bit of a reverse T shape at the back, but no shoulder seam, which I like for this quilted project because it gave me less seam to have to bound together with my material that I had to handle.
Okay, you all lovely sewists. I thought I would finish this puffy jacket adventure by putting together a few outfits. I had a lot of fun making this video and this project. I hope that you picked up a few tricks in there, or that at least you found some inspiration for your next project or some nice entertainment to finish your day. Please, please, please subscribe, like, or leave a comment. I would love having you around for my next project.